All right, well, take it away, Ryland.
Great. Thank you, Jim and Christina, for inviting me and giving me a platform to talk about this next generation adaptation plan. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here. We can get going. And the one thing I will say is it's nice to have this recording, but what I did do is I made it so that this presentation is tailored specifically for MDE tasks. So hopefully you guys will find it more useful in that way as well. So just a little bit of an introduction. Jim did a great start on this before I came on here. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is the Next Generation Adaptation Plan, which is a product of the Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group, which is nested under the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. And then we're going to dive a little bit into the plan and talk more about what is MDE's role in some of these different chapters and sections so that you have an idea of where you may be tagged. So the Commission on Climate Change was codified into law back in 2015. And as Jim said, it's staffed by MDE and is chaired by the Secretary of MDE. And its charge is primarily on advising the governor and the General Assembly, specifically on mitigation, but also it does have in there preparing for and adapting to the consequences of climate change. So the ARWG, or it's composed of, 8 different working groups. The original 4 are these 4: the Greenhouse Gas Mitigation Group, the Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group, the Scientific and Technical Working Group, and the Communication and Outreach Working Group. But in 2022, with the Climate Solutions Now Act, 4 more groups were added, and those were just begun last year in 2024 once they were fully staffed up. That is the Just Transition, Employment and Retraining, Energy Industry Revitalization, Energy Resilience and Efficiency, and the Solar Photovoltaic Systems Recovery, Reuse, and Recycling groups. But obviously today I'm going to be just focusing on our Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group. So the ARWG has been around since that original form of the Commission on Climate Change. It is chaired, as Jim said earlier, by the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. And it supports the goal of the Commission by developing that strategy for reducing the climate change vulnerability and providing state and local government with tools to plan for and adapt to more extreme weather and rise in sea levels anticipated as a consequence of climate change. So it's really just focusing on that adaptation and resilience piece. But in 2023, the focus of the group became in putting together what we are calling this Next Generation Adaptation Plan. So what is the Next Generation Adaptation Plan? It actually was preceded by a very important document called the Adaptation Framework that was published in 2021. The Adaptation Framework is a comprehensive list of strategies across multiple different sectors and focuses that advise the state on what are the potential strategies that we could use to help Maryland adapt and become resilient to climate change. But the next goal was to take that framework and the list of strategies and to choose the strategies that would make the most sense to prioritize over the next 10 years. Because we acknowledge, of course, even though we could have hundreds and hundreds of strategies, we cannot accomplish them all at the same time. We need to focus on certain subsets first. So the Next Generation Adaptation Plan was taking that framework and then subsetting it and choosing what we're going to focus on for the next 10 years. So NextGen is specifically tasked with creating implementable CRE strategies and activities, deciding who is responsible for leading each of these activities, and developing those qualitative and quantitative progress steps to determine if we're making progress. And this was thankfully published in August of 2024. And what you see on the left is the cover. This is also published online for any of you who want to read it. I can provide the link at the end of the presentation. So the way that the Next Generation Adaptation Plan is broken up is that on the left, you'll see we have 3 overarching focus groups that are justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, local government and state service delivery, and climate jobs and training. Those are focus groups that have principles that will be applied to all of the different sector groups, and they have overarching tasks that overall most agencies are going to be responsible for implementing as a whole. Those are less divided up into agency by agency tasks. Then we have 5 different sector groups on the right-hand side. They're broken up into water resources, which was co-led by Jim George from MDE. We also have human health, working lands and natural resources-based economies, natural resources and ecosystems, and protecting critical infrastructure. So how the plan is laid out, we took each of our priorities and broke them into 2 different subsections, resource ready and investment needed. And what this means is we acknowledge that not everything we need to accomplish is going to be ready to go tomorrow, but that doesn't mean that we should not list it as a priority to include. So we wanted to separate that out so that people acknowledge that there is going to be maybe a little extra effort required of those investment needed priorities, but that these groups still determined they were important. And resource ready is usually going to be things that maybe have work ongoing, the groups already exist to spearhead them, or something along those lines to indicate that there's momentum behind it already. And each of those priorities is broken into steps that we call milestones. And those milestones are divided into short-term, midterm, and long-term. Short-term is 0 to 2 years, again, to capture things that may already be ongoing, hence the 0. Mid, which is 2 to 5, and long, which is 5+. So obviously with this plan only having been officially published last August, we're still in the short-term phase of those milestones. There also was an agency tasks appendix added because we recognize that it may be difficult and that people are not going to read maybe a 100-page document cover to cover. So we broke it out into tables for each agency to be able to see at a quick glance where they may be tagged, what milestones they maybe are supposed to be working on at a quicker glance than having to flip through the entire PDF or document. So I'm going to now get into some of the key MDE touch points. So as I mentioned before, all the focus group priorities are things we want every agency to be looking at and working on. And hopefully that is something that I think a lot of our agencies are already doing. I know Momentum has moved a lot of that direction, including, increasing our equity, diversity, policies, improving the way we deliver services to local governments, and increasing workforce development in that climate jobs aspect. So I know you guys can probably already think of a couple ways that your agency is doing that work, but I want to make sure to remind everybody that there are tasks in here that everybody is working on. And then the primary other groups that you will find MDE's work captured in is the water resources group, working lands, and natural resources, which probably won't be any surprise to you all to hear. So starting off with the JEDI group, which is the short version of the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. The resource ready priorities, I'm just going to list them all out and not go into the milestones because that could take me probably an hour or longer to go into. But resource ready things, again, are things that we already have maybe ongoing or the resources for. So priority 1, building equitable representation to governance. Priority 2, aligning state and local government around climate justice. And priority 3, develop a communication and engagement strategy that aligns with community needs. And you might start seeing also that we encouraged a lot of the groups to have crossovers with any of the other focus and sector groups where it makes sense. So priority 3, I think you could already, and 2 as well, you could probably already see maybe aligns with that local government chapter that we're going to be talking about next. So then the investment needed section, again, are things that maybe we don't have the resources devoted to yet, but we acknowledge that we need to prioritize. Priority 1, which is identify and address patterns of structural disinvestment in underserved and overburdened communities. Priority 2, increase equitable investment of climate adaptation funding. And priority 3, commit resources to develop relationships with underserved and overburdened communities. So next up is the local government priorities. This, I should also note here, not every group came up with 3 priorities for each section, which is perfectly fine. Some it just didn't make sense for. So this group only has 2 resource-ready priorities, which are first to provide a web-based toolkit of capacity building tools, resources, grant opportunities, and trainings. And priority 2, initiate an educational campaign to support equitable climate adaptation action. And then for investment needed, priority 1, to work with local governments to develop equitable resilience plans. Priority 2, increase technical support to local governments. And priority 3, align state funding and programs to support climate adaptation in underserved and overburdened communities. And then the last focus group is the climate jobs and training group, which Resource Ready has priority 1, expand grant and accelerator programs to support industry adaptation. Priority 2, support and create opportunities for mid-career retraining that enhance climate adaptation and resilience and target underserved and overburdened communities. And priority 3, support and create opportunities for early career training that enhance climate adaptation and resilience community needs. And then finally, investment needed. Priority 1, connect entry-level, mid-career job seekers and existing employees with state-level resources, grants, and training opportunities focused on climate adaptation. And priority 2, target a no net job loss goal where various economic sectors emerge or pivot to support climate adaptation. So again, those 3 slides that I just went over were the focus groups, which all agencies are going to be working on both individually and together on each of those priorities. So now I'm going to get more into the sector groups, and each of these slides I have only included the sections that have specific connotations for MDE. So in these next up slides, you're not going to be seeing the whole chapter, you're just going to seeing what might apply to you guys. So water resources is a big one for MDE, and I think that's partially because you do a lot of this work already, and also partially because Jim was the co-lead. So he was very familiar with what you guys do and made sure to write in some of the initiatives that you already have ongoing, as well as things that you really want to move towards in the future. So for Resource Ready Priority 1, it's going to center around water quality. And the key MDE tasks here are using monitoring and research, increase the resilience of water quality. And then priority 2 focuses more around water hazards. And the primary overarching goal for that is to refine climate vulnerability assessments and plans to address water-related hazards. Now, these bullet points, I really just summarize some of the actions that are included in more detail in the plan. To actually see how these are going to be measured or to see the step-by-step tasks, you're going to have to look at the actual PDF. But if you really wanted to look at water resources, you can just focus on that chapter and not necessarily have to read the whole document. So for the investment needed priority, that is centered around water supply. And that goal is to adjust water supply management practices and programs to address climate change impacts. So if you have any detailed questions, we can answer that at the end. And luckily for this chapter, we have Jim here so he can get into more detail if you have specific questions. So as for working lands, this one is more centered around fisheries, forestry, and agriculture, but there are still connotations that touch on MDE's work. So for Resource Ready Priority 1, the overarching goal is to plan for addressing land and aquatic habitat changes. And these milestones are really as part of a team planning that landscape scale approach to maintaining resource lands and management actions that support resource-based industries and maintain a resilient supply chain. So it probably is no surprise to you why that is listed as a team effort, because it's going to take fisheries working with the aquatic landscape and things like that to really come together to maintain that supply chain. And then for investment needed, priority 3 lists encourage innovation and adoption of new technologies. And in this priority, it's actually talking about easing or allowing for less permitting restrictions on using new technologies. to increase resilience of operations. This could mean new fishing devices. This could also mean something like allowing for fishermen to catch a new species like blue catfish. So there again is going to be a lot of teamwork involved in this, but MDE's role in permitting is going to be the main factor with this one to help us redesign the permitting process to allow for more innovation. And then finally, we have the natural resources priorities. For resource ready, priority 1 centers around conservation and restoration targets. And again, MDE's role here is going to be as part of a team, updating those ecological targets with numerical goals based on the most recent data. So updating things with things that we learn based on climate change or changes that we see based on climate change for our ecological targets. And then priority 2 is agency coordination for priority resource management issues. And again, that is as part of a team developing adaptation implementation plans for our natural resources. So getting that plan together and allowing for our resources to be managed in an adaptive capacity is a big goal. And then finally, investment needed for natural resources priorities. Priority 1 centers around data, tools, and protocols for resource managers. And this is developing those resource-specific data tools and protocols. Again, part of a team because we all have different tools, we all have different knowledge and areas that need to come together to develop these protocols and align them across the state. And then priority 2 is around natural resource and ecosystems in local planning. And that is to incorporate natural resource focus areas into local planning documents. And that could be anything across the board from comprehensive plans, hazard mitigation plans, nuisance flood plans, anything like that, making sure we have that natural resource focus area and that it is adapting to climate change or has a plan for adapting to climate change built into that as well. So in conclusion, this is a really hefty document, but it got massive buy-in from lots of different agencies that participated. We had state agencies, but we also had local governments, we had nonprofit groups, we had a very wide range of people who crafted this document. It was not just crafted by DNR staff. So it is not a DNR document mandated everybody else. As you can see, Jim helped create the water resources chapter, and that is indicative of the other chapters as well, where we had experts leading that creation. This tool should be used as a prioritization and alignment tool, and our ideal goal is that this should be seamlessly integrated into the workflow that already exists. We hope that it is not creating this massive additional burden to get these work done. Some of the things that we have to acknowledge that the investment needed items are maybe not going to already have initiatives underway. But if we can build this into team workflows, that should be hopefully lessening the burden on each individual and help each agency get those tasks achieved. This is also important to acknowledge as an overarching document. We don't want that focus groups to be lost just because there is not necessarily any one agency in charge of them. Every agency should be ensuring that those focus group priorities are integrated. So that's really important that we acknowledge that and don't forget those in the wayside of the other, maybe more discrete, sometimes sector group priorities. And then finally, coordination is going to be a huge piece. And that is kind of what we're working on today and what I'm starting to do now that the document is officially published. This is going to require agencies to work across units and as part of multi-agency teams. So I know MDE is a big agency just like DNR is, and it is challenging for us to figure out what's the best way for DNR to get our units to talk to each other and work on these tasks together. I know that's going to be a challenge for MDE as well, because you have a lot of different focuses in your agency and maybe you don't always talk to each other. But I think it's also going to be important to know what mechanisms already exist. Do you have existing working groups focused on these that can maybe take on some of the tasks? Or do you need to develop a new set of meeting or leaderships to help move this forward? And so that's going to be a big question as we go forward here. And what I'm doing here today is just helping to introduce people who may have never heard of this plan before and give you a little taste of what exactly is in there. Finally, and that's because accountability. Next Gen progress is actually one of the governor's key performance indicators. So we are going to be asked on how much progress we are making. We don't necessarily have to go milestone by milestone and check off this one is achieved, this one's not achieved, not that level of detail, but there is going to be an expectation that progress is being made at the highest level in Maryland. So that's really important because we're being held to our word here, and we need everybody on board to make it happen. And that is it. That's all I had today. I wanted to make sure to leave a lot of time for questions, but I included logos for a lot of the different groups that helped us craft the document. We could not have done it without them. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ryland. And I'll take any questions too, if people are curious about a little deeper dive into what the water resources action items are. I guess we call them milestones.
Yes, there's milestones, and then of course, those are nested under the priorities, which are that larger group. And I'm putting in the chat a link to the website where you can find the Next Generation Adaptation Plan, as well as the adaptation framework underneath of it, if you wanted to see that base document, as well as the one we're talking about today. And again, no expectation for anybody to read it cover to cover. It's a bit of a beast, but it's got a lot of information in there.
Feel free to raise your hand or just come off mute and ask a question. I have a question, and I don't expect a real answer, but I was a little surprised, and it's probably my own fault. But I was a little surprised that MDE didn't show up in the critical infrastructure section. We certainly are hearing about critical drinking water infrastructure in relation to the flooding that just occurred out in Western Maryland. And, you know, I guess in fairness, it was a challenge pulling this all together. But do you have any thoughts on that, and maybe thoughts about how this document is anticipated to evolve in the future?
Yes, and so I'm glad you brought that up, because that is an important thing that I should note too, is the critical infrastructure is a good example, I think, of it's a product of the group that created it, right? And in the critical infrastructure chapter, the priorities actually really focus maybe less on, you know, our current critical, well, I should backtrack. They focus more on the pieces that are more identifying our critical infrastructure. So a little backwards to maybe what you would think should come first, because apparently, and I don't work in this field, so I don't want to, nobody quote me on this, but there is a lot of background work that needs to be done before we can start doing some of the adaptation work that we need to do in the future. So I think if you flip through and look at those priorities, you wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see MDE wasn't necessarily involved in those directly. I'm sure you'll be consulted on some of the like wastewater treatment plant stuff like that, but it is primarily going to be an MDOT focus with MDEM as well, to just get our inventory up and running, which is an important step that we don't actually have yet. So again, this isn't going to be a comprehensive plan either. There are going to be things that people think are important that aren't in this plan. And we just had to prioritize what we do for 10 years. You know, after that, maybe then we can start to tackle some of that other stuff.
Good point. You're refreshing my memory. Speaking of MDEM, since the document or the information for the document was completed, I believe a law was passed that created an Office of Resilience in the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, MDEM, if I've got that right.
Mhm.
Can you speak a little bit to what, I know this is, you're not an MDEM, but you're quite familiar with what they're doing, I think. Can you speak a little bit to what they're doing and how this document might fit into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're totally correct. The Office of Resilience was established under the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. They are currently in the process of producing their state resilience strategy, which now is, of course, coming out after NextGen was published. They are well aware of NextGen and have been reading it and talking with me and making sure that these documents are speaking to each other. But as this plan, as their plan, excuse me, has been developing, I think it's become very clear where these documents sit is very different. So their state resilience strategy, number one, is going to be focused on resilience to a lot of different factors, not just climate resilience. So it is a much broader plan. They're also not really taking the tack that NextGen did, where they're not listing out discrete milestone by milestone steps. They're really keeping it bigger overarching goals for a lot of the different sector and focus groups that they are using. They're not using the exact same groups that we did to divide up the state or into different areas, sector and focus areas, that is. So they are taking the ideas from NextGen, not duplicating effort, and are integrating it in the way that they need to ensure that climate adaptation is built in. But then I think they're taking it also in different directions in terms of like information technology resilience and stuff like that are in their plan, which I have no expertise in myself. So they have been a great resource to work with along the way, and I'm happy with our level of communication. And they participate in the Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group as well, so we make sure everything we do is in alignment.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Ryland, I just wanted to say there's probably others that are on the call that are responsible for reporting on a milestone. So just having the background and the understanding and organization and the format of the plan has been very, very helpful. So I just wanted to do a shout out. Thank you for presenting today, because it provides a lot of context. So thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. And we hope, we completely acknowledge that this is a big task and we want to make this as easy as possible on everybody. So Jim has the appendix table that I referenced earlier with MDE's tasks, and I hope you are able to share that out, or maybe you already have, with everybody who may have something to do. But I should also say, feel free to make that whatever you need it to be to work for you guys. We just wanted to give you guys something to jump off of here.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, Taylor. We do have a couple of staff folks from the WSA climate team working on giving a kind of a status report with regard to WSA's areas of activity or milestones in the Next Generation Adaptation Plan. And related to that, I just wanted to quickly share my screen just to make sure that everyone is aware that the Water and Science Administration has a overarching game plan to deal with climate change in terms of adaptation. So we've got WSA's Water and Climate Change webpage, which has a little introductory video, and it also has our climate dashboard. And this dashboard identifies 4 priority areas: science and planning, since science is our middle name; climate smart water permits, since that's where the rubber meets the roads and that's where we have unique authority to actually either require people to do things or require people not to do things; green, blue, and traditional infrastructure, since infrastructure is so important; and then the cleanup, priority of emergency preparedness and response. I just point this out to you. If you look for MDE climate dashboard, you'll probably find it via Google search. I'm not going to belabor this, but I did want to just make sure people are aware of this, that we have a transparent set of commitments and tracking of those commitments in terms of progress. And then for each of them, we have what we call our detail sheets, where you can drill down into more details about the particular subject, particular priority area. So this happens to be green, blue, and traditional infrastructure. So you can see, what's feeding into the progress graphs. So I just wanted folks to be aware of this. It is very closely aligned with the next generation adaptation plan, but it's not perfectly aligned, of course, in part because time changes. And also, I think WSA folks should be aware that we've taken another step in this regard in terms of resilience building. Lee Curry kind of has worked with some of the key programs, largely stormwater, dam safety, and flood management, and our wetlands program, on putting together kind of our next generation adaptation strategy. So he's got a plan. I don't think it's really come out publicly yet, but our commitment as a climate team, the climate team will both work on this next generation reporting of progress and become very steeped in the details of that, which align very closely, as I said, with our climate dashboard priorities. And then with that background knowledge this year, they'll also go through Lee Curry's resilience plan and make sure that those items are also being tracked in our dashboard, our climate dashboard. And then, eventually feed back to the next generation plan when it eventually goes through its update, which I guess is a few years off in the future. So that's kind of my way of wrapping my arms around multiple things that are going on, making sure that staff who are interested, hopefully those on this call, are aware that these systems are in place to bring some structure to an otherwise fairly daunting set of activities, I have to admit. So I appreciate everyone's time. Let's just see if anyone else has any questions or comments before we sign off. Well, hearing none, again, Ryland, thank you so much for your efforts today to speak with us and the time it took to kind of wrap our heads around what we were wanting to ask of you.
Yes, feel free to send
anybody
anybody my email address if you have any questions or want to chew on this a little more.
Okay, and it is ryland.taylor@maryland.gov.
Yep.
All right, no mysterious numbers in there or anything.
Nope, I got lucky. Thank you so much for your time, and you guys have a great rest of your day.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take
Bye.
care.